All right, let's jump right in. Picture the scene. It's Memphis, right around 727 BCE. Now, this is the ancient capital of Egypt we're talking about, a city that was already incredibly sacred and immensely powerful for about 2,000 years by this point. I mean, to the people living there, Memphis was older than the Roman Empire is to us today. And it has just fallen. Every single rival ruler in the Nile Delta has completely submitted. But here's the catch. The man they've submitted to? He's not Egyptian. He is Piye, the king of Kush. He's the ruler of a Nubian kingdom down to the south that Egypt had actually colonized and controlled for centuries. And now, he's the one commanding the wealthiest, most prestigious throne in the entire ancient world.
So, if you look at literally any other conqueror in history, every ordinary logic of war says he should stay, right? He should set up shop in Memphis or Thebes, completely absorb Egypt's institutions, and rule this massive empire he just spent months fighting to secure. But once the formal submissions are done and all that unbelievable wealth is collected, Pei does the absolute unthinkable. He just turns around and goes home. He heads back up the Nile, back past the cataracts, all the way to his own capital at Napata, and he actually leaves Egypt to be governed by the very same local rulers he literally just defeated. It is, without a doubt, one of the strangest anticlimaxes in ancient military history, and honestly, it's this hidden piece of the past that almost no one ever talks about.
Part 1. A Shattered Kingdom.
Okay, so to truly wrap our heads around why Pai's decision is just so incredibly bizarre, we have to rewind and look at the power dynamics that came before him. Because for the longest time, the relationship between Egypt and Nubia ran in the exact opposite direction. Back during Egypt's New Kingdom period, so we're talking roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE, Egyptian pharaohs treated Nubia as a colonized province. They heavily extracted its gold. Actually, fun fact, the very word Nubia likely comes from Nub, which is the ancient Egyptian word for gold. So for generations, Nubians grew up under Egyptian rule, and they deeply absorbed Egyptian religious practices, especially the worship of the god Amun. But as we know, empires don't last forever. Egyptian central authority eventually collapsed, and out of that massive chaotic power vacuum, a new, fiercely independent Kushite kingdom emerged, centered right around the city of Napata. Basically, the student had inherited the temple, and they were about to inherit a whole lot more. Now, imagine the absolute superpower of the ancient world just completely fractured into a bunch of feuding city-states. Because by the time Piye takes the Kushite throne around 747 BCE, Egypt looks nothing like the unified juggernaut it used to be. The Third Intermediate Period had shattered the country into this chaotic patchwork of competing local rulers. And the biggest headache among these rivals was a guy named Tefnacht, based up in the Western Delta. Tefnacht starts aggressively expanding his territory south, actively trying to unify this fractured Egypt under his own control. And he pushes uncomfortably close to Middle Egypt, directly threatening sacred religious centers that actually fell under Kushite protection. For Piye, watching all this unfold from Napata, this wasn't just geopolitics. This was a direct, literal threat to his sacred world. Part 2. The Campaign of Ritual. You really have to understand how Pi viewed this whole operation. The Kushite kings of this era took the worship of Amun incredibly seriously. You could easily argue they were way more rigid and traditional about it than the actual Egyptian rulers of the time. Egypt's religious institutions had gotten super inconsistent during all that political chaos. From the perspective of Napata, these northern rulers were basically just using local cults for their own political convenience. So Pi's court positions Kushite as the true keeper of the older, pure religious tradition. Stepping into Egypt wasn't some opportunistic land grab. To Pi, it was a divine correction. He was there to protect proper worship. The historical irony here is just wild when you think about it. The formerly colonized people are now acting as the strict, uncompromising enforcers of their former colonizers' original religion. And that brings us to the actual march north. Piye enforced these incredibly strict, ritualistic rules of war that a normal territorial conqueror wouldn't care about at all. City after city was given a very simple choice: submit and be spared, or resist and face a brutal siege. But submission wasn't just a military thing. Piye's forces actually refused the surrender of rulers who hadn't properly purified themselves according to strict ritual custom before approaching him. I mean, can you imagine a conquering army rejecting your unconditional surrender over a religious technicality? It's nuts. But for the cities that did submit correctly, they were treated with astonishing generosity. Their populations were spared, and the rulers were literally just left in place. And the only reason we have all these incredibly granular details today is because Piye had the entire campaign meticulously inscribed on a massive granite stele back at his capital. The Great Piye Stele is just an absolute treasure of a historical document. It doesn't read like your standard, boring royal boast. It reads more like a first-person novel. It gets into the weeds of specific negotiations, Piye's personal frustration when rulers tried to cut corners on purification, and his genuine satisfaction when they showed the correct reverence. At one point, he literally forces defeated rulers to wait outside the palace in Memphis because they hadn't met a religious technicality. It's delightfully absurd, but he was dead serious. To this day, it remains one of the single greatest primary sources of ancient African history. Part 3. Memphis Falls. So Piye's army takes the city, and with Memphis secured, the resistance across the rest of the delta just effectively collapses. One by one, the remaining local rulers, including Tefnacht himself, send their formal submissions, their tribute, and their oaths of loyalty to Piye. In the space of a single, highly orchestrated campaign, a king from a land that Egypt had once completely dominated became the undisputed master of a reunified Egypt. He essentially became the founder of what history now calls Egypt's 25th dynasty.
Which perfectly sets up the unbelievable anticlimax we started with. Because having achieved total, undeniable victory, Piye just packs up and leaves. He doesn't stick around to build massive cities in his own name like Alexander the Great. He doesn't crush the territory into some rigid administrative machine like the Romans did. He didn't even bother installing his own loyal Kushite proxies to keep an eye on things. He left the defeated Egyptian rulers, functionally untouched as local governors, and he went back to Napata. He treated the entire campaign exactly like a completed religious obligation, rather than the start of a military occupation. It's the ultimate proof that his religious motivations were 100% genuine.
Part 4. The Legacy of the Black Pharaohs. Now, naturally, when Egypt's local rulers realized Piye had actually left, they tried to reassert their independence. So his successors, like his brother Shabaka, had to return to reassert direct control. And it was under rulers like Taharka that the Kushite Empire reached its absolute peak. We're talking massive building projects, including a colossal colonnaded hall at Karnak, whose sheer size will still completely dwarf you if you visit today. For a time, Kush stood squarely at the center of an empire stretching from deep inside modern Sudan all the way to the borders of the Near East, eventually even clashing with a massive Assyrian empire. It was hands down one of the largest domains ever controlled from an African capital in the ancient world. And they left behind a physical legacy that is heavily, heavily misunderstood today. Kushite civilization built its own totally distinct, smaller, much steeper-sided pyramids at their royal burial sites. And here's a mind-blowing fact that really shows just how big our historical misconceptions are. The region of ancient Nubia in modern Sudan contains vastly more pyramids than Egypt itself. It's not even close. But because Egypt has so completely dominated our popular imagination, the rich, distinct culture of Kush is often just lumped in with it or forgotten entirely. But make no mistake, Kush was its own spectacular, profoundly independent civilization. For way too long, history just kind of brushed past the kingdom of Kush. But today, we're finally reconstructing this civilization on its own incredible terms. And what we are left with is this absolutely awe-inspiring reality. Piye was a conqueror who took absolutely everything. And then, simply because he actually meant what he said about protecting sacred order rather than seizing personal glory, he gave most of it back, and he went home to his sacred mountain. He left behind an incredible stele, a reunified kingdom, and a legacy of more pyramids than the country he'd just conquered. It really makes you wonder, what would history look like today if more conquerors actually fought for their beliefs and then simply went home?